She walked up to the most powerful duke in Edinburgh and proposed marriage to his face. He laughed. But Philippa Crane didn't come to Scotland to be charming. She came to save her father's name, and Julian IV was the only man who could do it. The problem? He'd been burned before, badly, by a woman who did exactly what Philippa is doing now. This is the story of a woman with a plan, a duke with a wound, and the moment honesty becomes more dangerous than any scheme. Edinburgh in October had a particular quality of light. Thin, precise, arriving at an angle that found every flaw. The assembly rooms on George Street were lit against it with 200 candles, and the effect was less warmth than exposure. Philippa Crane stood at the edge of the upper gallery and counted the Duke of Carlo's smiles. She had been counting for 11 minutes. In that time he had produced 7, 2 for elderly women who required them, 3 for men whose names she did not yet know, 1 for a girl who blushed so violently she had to be steered toward a window, and 1, brief and different from the others, for something he found privately amusing. That last one he kept to himself. The others he distributed like a man paying small coins he could afford to lose. Philippa noted this and revised 2 assumptions she had made about him from the Edinburgh papers. Below, the Duke accepted a glass he did not drink from and said something that made the circle around him laugh. He did not laugh with them. He waited for the laughter to subside and then said something else. She watched him for 3 more minutes. Then she went downstairs to be introduced. The introduction was managed by Mrs. Farquhar, who managed most things in Edinburgh's upper social reaches and was aware of it. She was a small woman with excellent posture and the conversational instincts of a border collie. "Your Grace, Miss Crane, her father is Sir Alistair Crane, the financier, you'll know the name." A beat perfectly timed that acknowledged everything without saying it. "Miss Crane has been lately in London." "Miss Crane?" The Duke inclined his head. Up close the charm was more structural than she had expected. It lived in the arrangement of his features as much as in any effort he made. He was not trying, particularly. "How do you find Edinburgh?" "Colder than London," she said, "and more honest about it." One corner of his mouth moved. "That is the most diplomatic thing anyone has said about our weather in recent memory." "I was not being diplomatic." "No," he agreed and looked at her with slightly more attention than he had been giving the room. "I don't think you were." Mrs. Farquhar, satisfied, had already moved on. Philippa excused herself with a small nod and went to find her father's business partner, Mr. Gideon Lyle, who had promised to introduce her to 3 people she actually needed to meet. She did not look back. She had seen enough. Sir Alistair Crane was not present at the assembly that evening, which was deliberate. He had learned across 30 years of making money in rooms that would have preferred he didn't, that his presence at a social event functioned differently from his absence. When he arrived, people noticed the investigation. When Philippa arrived alone, they noticed her. She had understood this since she was 17. Her father's library had contained a copy of Fordyce's sermons she used as a doorstop, and 300 volumes of economic theory she had read, with the focus of someone who understood that knowledge was the only capital that could not be investigated. She still had opinions about Ricardo that she aired rarely and strategically. What could not be learned, only managed, was the particular sensation of walking into a room and feeling the moment when people recalled her father's name. A small recalibration, a slight cooling. Most people covered it well. The Duke of Carlo had not recalibrated at all, which was interesting. Either he did not know, unlikely given Mrs. Farquhar had announced her father's name in the same breath as her own, or he did not consider it relevant. She filed the question and went to find Gideon Lyle. She arranged the private meeting herself. This required 3 days, 2 intermediaries, and the cooperation of Mrs. Drummond, mother of the upcoming wedding's bride, a woman with considerable social authority and the useful quality of believing that what Philippa asked of her had been her own idea. The gathering was 8 people, small enough for meaningful conversation. Philippa waited until the tea had been distributed and the room had settled. Then she moved to the window. He joined her in 4 minutes. She had estimated 5, so she revised slightly upward her assessment of his perceptiveness. "They have been arranging this," he said, looking out at the garden. "Yes," she said. He glanced at her. "Most people would deny it." "I find denial inefficient." She set down her teacup. "I have a proposal for you, Your Grace. I would be grateful if you would hear it before you respond." "Very well." "You need a wife," she said. Not urgently, you are 31, the dukedom is sound, but you will need one, and the longer you leave it, the more society will speculate about the delay. That speculation is not currently in your favor. Nothing in his expression changed. She continued, I need a husband with a title old enough to render my father's reputation irrelevant. I am 24. I am not sentimental about marriage, and I have no interest in pretending otherwise. I would make you an excellent duchess. I am organized, not extravagant, capable of running a household without instruction. I would not require things from you that you have no interest in giving. I have a list of terms, which I will share at whatever point seems appropriate. She stopped. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he laughed. It was not a cruel laugh. That was almost worse. It was the laugh of a man who had heard the punchline before the joke was finished, who recognized the shape of it, had heard this rhythm before, and found it confirmed something he had already decided about the world. It lasted only a moment. He recovered. Miss Crane, he said, I am sensible of the clarity of your proposal. I'm afraid I must decline. May I ask why? Because I have no interest in a transaction. You have misunderstood me, she said. I'm not offering a transaction. I'm offering an arrangement between two adults who understand their own interests. That is different. Is it? A transaction requires one party wants something the other is selling. What I am proposing is a partnership between two people who each have something the other needs. The distinction matters. It is a distinction, he said carefully, without a difference. She picked up her teacup. Then we disagree. Thank you for hearing me, Your Grace. She moved away from the window, rejoined the nearest conversation, and did not look at him again for the rest of the afternoon. In the carriage home, she thought about the laugh for exactly as long as it was useful. Then she stopped. What she had seen, recognition, not of her specifically, but of a category. He had slotted her into something familiar and laughed at the fit, which meant the category had been established before she arrived. Someone had tried something resembling her proposal. He had put her in that file. He was wrong, but she understood why the file existed. The question was whether the file was a wall or a door. Walls simply held. The laugh was a signal. I have been here before. And signals implied expectation, and expectation could be disappointed. What she was less certain of, and she did not press it more than once, was whether she had miscalculated by showing her hand so completely. She had bet on his intelligence preferring candor. He had laughed. Perhaps she had underestimated the damage. Her father looked up from 3 ledgers when she came in. Well? He declined, she said. Sir Alistair set down his pen. I see. I'll go again differently, she said, and went upstairs to change for dinner. The Drummond wedding was a fortnight away. There were dinners, a concert at St. Cecilia's Hall, a card party at the Morrisons, and a house party at Drummond Park. 3 days in the country, 20 guests, the kind of proximity that gave Edinburgh society material for 6 months of subsequent conversation. Philippa attended everything. The Duke attended everything. The result was that they occupied the same rooms at intervals of roughly 48 hours. She did not approach him. She was interesting to other people instead, genuinely interested in the solicitor Hartley's account of a property dispute, and in Forbes's eldest son, who was studying medicine and more engaging than his father's mortgages warranted. But she was aware that being interested in others in a room containing the Duke of Carlo was doing a particular kind of work. At a dinner at the Morrisons, 14 at table, he was seated across from her and 4 places down. She spoke to the men on either side and did not glance at him, which required the management of a curiosity she had not budgeted for. He had called her proposal a transaction. She kept returning to the word. She could not explain the difference to someone who had already decided they were the same thing. The question was what had made him decide. She could feel the shape of it in the way he held himself back from his own charm at intervals, in the way the private smile never reached his eyes. The concert at St. Cecilia's Hall was on a Thursday, and Philippa was late, genuinely her father's meeting running long. She arrived during the first piece to find the only remaining seat was at the end of the 3rd row, which she took with minimal disruption, and discovered that the Duke of Carlo was beside her. Miss Crane, he said very quietly. Your Grace, I apologize for the disruption. You were not a disruption, he said. You were a conclusion. In the pause between the first and second pieces, a conclusion to what? I had been noticing your absence. I had concluded you were avoiding me. He looked at the stage. "Why, your arrival suggests I was wrong. I was late because my father's meeting ran long." "I know," he said. "I said I was wrong." She looked at him. He was watching the stage. The third piece began. At the interval they were claimed by other people. But walking to her delayed carriage in the cold afterward, she thought about, "I had been noticing your absence, and what it cost him to say it, and that when he was wrong he said so plainly." She revised 3 assumptions and went home. The house party at Drummond Park began on a Wednesday. Philippa arrived in the second carriage, was shown to a room overlooking the kitchen garden, and spent the first hour walking the grounds before anyone expected her to be sociable. She was at the far end of the garden looking at the hills when she heard footsteps. "This part of the garden is generally considered too cold for October," said the Duke. "I grew up in Edinburgh," she said. "This is merely October." He stopped beside her. He had the look of a man who had also escaped the house the moment it was possible. "Your father isn't with you." "No, he finds his presence at social events serves purposes he didn't intend." "And yours?" She turned to look at him. "Mine serves precisely the purposes I intend." He met her eyes, the slight recalibration when she said something he had not predicted. "That is either very confident or very controlled." "Both, I imagine." She paused. "Most things worth doing require both." He looked out at the hills. "What are you intending to serve at this particular party?" "At the moment, fresh air. I find that a certain quantity of cold and open space is necessary before I can be useful to anyone." "You use that word a great deal, useful." "It is a word I mean a great deal." He was quiet. Then, "I have met women who presented themselves as practical and without sentiment, and they were generally sentimental about something unexpected. A specific painting, their dog, the way a room smelled. The pattern holds," she said. "I'm sentimental about my father. I would do most things to ensure he is not further damaged by something that was not, quite, his fault." She said it without particular emphasis, the way you said true things you had said to yourself many times. "That is my sentiment. It is not small, but it is specific." "And the proposal," he said, "was in service of that." "Yes, which does not make it less of a transaction." "It makes it less of a mystery," she said. "The motives behind most marriages, stated plainly, would sound transactional. The difference is that I am telling you plainly." He looked at her. "You think I should admire that?" "I think you do," she said, slightly despite yourself. Something crossed his face, older and less comfortable than the private smile. "Miss Crane, I should tell you—" "You declined already," she said. "You don't need to decline again." "That wasn't what I was going to say." "Then what?" He looked at the hills. The wind came off the south and moved through the stripped trees. "I was going to say that honesty is not the only quality that matters in a proposal." "I know," she said, "but it is the first." They walked back up the path without quite walking together. It was on the second afternoon of the house party that she heard about Isabel Ray. She heard it from Miss Flora Drummond, the bride's younger sister, who was 19 and had not yet learned that some things should be said quietly. They were in the small sitting room, and Flora was doing what young women do in proximity to an attractive duke, relaying everything she knew in the direction of someone who might find it useful. And of course there was that dreadful business before he inherited. The woman, you know. Flora leaned in, delighted. She told everyone he had behaved very badly toward her, pressed his attentions or something of that sort, and then he inherited the dukedom 2 months later, and it looked like spite because it obviously was. Everyone knew they had simply had a falling out. But by then the story had gone around. She remembered slightly too late that she was describing a guest. He's quite restored his reputation since, and she married his own cousin, a Mr. Forth, within the season, which really said everything. Philippa kept her expression neutral. What was her name? Ray, Isabel Ray. Flora examined her embroidery. I think it must be very strange to be a duke, everyone wanting things from you. I imagine so, Philippa said. She thought about it that evening, dressing for dinner. A man at 24 who had loved someone enough to give her a gift, who had ended it for reasons she didn't yet know, who had his reputation dissected for it, and then watched the woman marry into his own family. She thought about the laugh in the Morrison drawing room, not cruel, which was almost worse, and what it must be like to hear a woman propose a frank arrangement and hear in it the same calculating music as before. He had not slotted her into the wrong category out of arrogance. He had done it out of self-preservation. That was different. That was, in fact, the thing she had not accounted for. The third morning of the house party, She went riding. She had not planned to, but came downstairs to find the hall busy with riding clothes and let herself be caught up in it. The Duke was already out. She could see him from the mounting block, 100 yards ahead on the track winding toward the ridge. She settled into the middle of the group and rode at a pace that pleased her, and when the group spread along the ridge, she found herself beside him in the simple way that happens when two people with similar paces end up in the same space without engineering it. "So you ride well," he said. "My father thought it important. He grew up without the means to." "What else?" She considered. "Languages, mathematics, music, because it was expected, but I find I'm genuinely glad of it. And," he was watching the track ahead, "that isn't the complete list. You paused before, obviously. My father taught me accounting," she said. "Not household ledger work, properly, double-entry bookkeeping." She watched his face. "You are now recalibrating." "I am," he admitted. "What do you do with it?" "I read his ledgers. I tell him when something doesn't balance." She paused. "I told him, in fact, that 3 of the accounts under investigation were structured in a way that would create that impression on examination. He had not seen it." He looked at her sharply. "When?" "A week before the investigation began. He restructured them. It was not enough. The investigators came regardless, but it changed what they found." She said this evenly. "He was not charged because there was insufficient evidence. I cannot tell you whether there would have been sufficient evidence otherwise." He was quiet for a long time. The city appeared below them in the grey morning light, smoke rising straight from 10,000 chimneys. "You are very honest about your family's position," he said. "I find dishonesty about it costs more in the long run. And about your own role in it." "I am proud of my role in it," she said. "My father is not a criminal, I believe that, but belief and evidence are not the same thing, and evidence is what courts require. Society requires neither, only a story it can repeat." He turned this over. She let him, then quietly, "What would you have done if the evidence had been there?" It was a real question. "I don't know," she said. "I didn't need to find out." He nodded once. They rode in silence. The view held them both. Then he said, "Are you ever afraid?" "Of what?" "That the thing you're protecting turns out to be worth less than the cost of the protection." She understood it was not only about her father. "Yes," she said, "I'm afraid of that." He said nothing more. They rode the rest of the ridge in silence. That afternoon it rained. The house party retreated indoors and did what house parties do in bad weather, spread through the available rooms, formed small conversational islands, and generated the particular atmosphere of people slightly more trapped together than intended. Philippa was in the library with Thomas Forbes, earnestly worried about the Edinburgh Infirmary's surgical instruments, when the Duke came in looking for something to read. He found something on the second shelf, settled in the armchair by the window. Thomas needed to write letters and excused himself, leaving Philippa in the library with the rain and the fire and the Duke, who was reading. She took a book herself. She was not going to perform discomfort by leaving. And then the Duke said, without looking up, "You know the Gibsons." "I know of the Gibsons. Olivia Gibson presented with me. We correspond. Her father is on the hospital board." He turned a page. "Thomas Forbes is right to be worried. Someone with access to the right people could do something about it." "You are suggesting I use my correspondence with Olivia Gibson." "I am observing that you have a connection Forbes does not," he said. "What you do with it is your concern." She looked at her book. "That is a remarkably practical suggestion from a man who objected to my proposal on the grounds that it was transactional." He was quiet a moment. "That is a fair point," he said. She had not expected him to concede it. She looked up. "Miss Crane," he said, "can I ask something you may find impertinent?" "So you may ask it." "Why did you choose me specifically?" She had prepared an answer and discarded it twice. She used the third version. "Because you are honest in the ways that matter. You did not pretend not to know my father's name when Mrs. Farquhar said it. You laughed, which was not what I had hoped for, but it was real. You said what you thought." She paused. "I can work with real. I cannot work with performance." He looked at her for a long time. "I laughed because I recognized the shape of what you were saying." "I know," she said. "I have since learned why." Something changed in his face, a careful stillness. "Drummond Park has thin walls." "Miss Flora Drummond has a carrying voice." He was quiet. Then, "She told you the version that was current at the time." "I assumed as much." "It was a long time ago," he said. as though testing whether he still believed it. She did not press it. She knew the difference between a door opening and a door simply not yet locked. They picked up their books. The fire shifted. The rain came, and they sat in a silence that had changed its character entirely. The last evening of the house party there was dancing. Not a formal ball. The drawing-room furniture pushed back. Mrs. Drummond at the pianoforte with more enthusiasm than accuracy. The 20 guests in informal sets. Philippa danced with Hartley, then Thomas Forbes, then a Mr. Abernethy, who talked extensively about school. The Duke appeared beside her as she waited for the next set. "Miss Crane, may I have this one?" They moved through the figures with the awareness of two people who have been in each other's orbit for 10 days, and are now briefly in physical proximity. "You have not made another proposal," he said as they moved through a figure. "No." "I wondered if you had abandoned the scheme." "No." They separated for 8 bars. When they came back, "What are you waiting for?" he said. "Better information," she said. He turned her through the next figure, and she saw clearly for the first time that the thing she had been watching for was not the private smile or the careful attention. It was this. The moment when his charm was not a performance or a shield, but something he had briefly stopped managing. He was, she thought, extremely good-looking when he forgot to be. She filed this in a different category from the others and did not examine it immediately. The dance ended. They parted. She went upstairs earlier than expected and sat at the window looking at the dark hills. She had not accounted for Isabel Ray. She had not accounted for what a man looked like when charm was not a shield. She had not accounted for the library and the rain and the careful way he said it was a long time ago. Her proposal had been designed for a man who was simply guarded. She was now contending with a man who had a reason. That was harder. It was also, she discovered with some displeasure, more interesting than she had budgeted for. Edinburgh received them back from Drummond Park with the indifference of a city that has its own concerns. The wedding was 5 days away. The social traffic intensified, and Philippa found herself in 4 different rooms over 3 days in which the Duke was also present. They did not contrive meetings. They also did not avoid each other. What replaced both arrangements was a mutual awareness that had stopped requiring effort. They spoke when near each other, did not speak when they were not. 2 rivers finding a shared channel without merging. She thought, this is what happens when 2 people stop performing. She also thought, this is dangerous in ways I had not adequately modeled. At a Morrison dinner, the same house where she had first heard his voice, she was seated 6 places from him, and at some point during the fish course, she felt him look at her from that distance and knew it without turning, the way you know a familiar sound. She did not turn. When she finally looked down the table, he was talking to the woman on his right and did not look at Philippa again. After dinner in the drawing-room, he crossed it. "Miss Crane," no pretense of accident. "Your Grace, I have been thinking about something you said at Drummond Park." He was looking at the room rather than at her. "That you can work with real and not with performance. I want to ask you something genuine." "Then ask it." He turned to look at her. "What do you actually want? Not the solution you've constructed. What do you want?" She was quiet for a moment. "I want my father's name to be said in a room the way other names are said, without the pause afterward. I want to stop calculating the social cost of every conversation before I enter it." She did not look away. "That is not complete, but it is honest." "And you," she said, "what do you want, not as a duke?" He was still for long enough that she thought he would not answer. "I want," he said quietly, "to be wrong about people more often." She held that. The room moved around them. Conversations, laughter, someone at the pianoforte doing a poor impression of Clementi. "You could start with me," she said. "You have already started. You decided I was Isabel Ray in a better dress, and then you spent a fortnight revising that, and now you are here asking what I actually want." She met his eyes. "You are being wrong about me progressively. It seems to be going well." The private smile. But it reached his eyes this time. "It seems to be," he said. They were standing quite close, closer than the room required. She was aware of it in a way she had been scrupulous about not being aware of, and she recognized that the scrupulousness had been its own strategy, and she was too far into honesty to maintain it. "I should tell you," she said, "that I have not stopped wanting what I proposed. I am simply also interested in the conversation we are currently having." He was quiet. That may be too honest, she said. No, he said. It is the first honest thing anyone has said to me in this context in a very long time. He almost said something more. She saw him decide against it. The Drummond wedding on Saturday, he said. Yes. Will you save me the first dance? It was not the question he had started toward. She knew that. He knew she knew. She said yes because it was the right answer for where they actually were, and took her leave. In the carriage she noted, with the precision she applied to everything, that something had shifted without a decision being made, and that the shift was in her as much as in him, and that this was precisely the thing she had told herself would not happen. She was going to need a fourth version of the answer to why she had chosen him specifically. The Friday before the wedding, her father came to the morning room. Sir Alistair was not a man who sought out his daughter, unless something had changed. He sat across from her writing desk with the expression he used when he was adding something up and didn't like the total. Crawford spoke to me, he said, her father's Edinburgh solicitor. About the Duke of Carlo there is talk. What kind? The kind that notices when a young woman and a duke have been observed in repeated private conversation over a fortnight. He was careful, as always. Crawford thought I should know it is being remarked on, as a prospect or as a failure, depending on who is remarking. I proposed an arrangement to him, she said. 3 weeks ago, he declined. Since then we have had a number of conversations I intended to be preparatory to a better constructed second proposal, which have become, she considered her words, more complicated than I intended. Her father looked at her. More complicated how? I am not sure yet, she said. He was quiet, unusual for him. Philippa, I want you to understand something. You were not designed to be a solution. I know you believe that is your purpose. It was never my intention for it to be so. He looked at his hands. Your mother would have told you that rather earlier and more directly. She did not tell him that she knew it was not his intention, and that intention and result were different things, and that she had decided entirely on her own what her purpose was. She had learned that the most protective thing she could do for him was to let him believe she operated freely. I know, she said. So if the situation with Carlo has become something you did not plan for, he said, I want you to know I will not require the scheme of you. He stood, picked up his hat. I can withstand Edinburgh society's opinion for a few more years. Thank you, she said. He paused at the door. He is well regarded, I understand, apart from the old business. He is, she said. Her father left. She sat at the writing desk for a long time and did not write anything. She pressed the bruise once firmly to establish the full extent of it. She was afraid that she had come to Edinburgh to find a duke and had found something she had not budgeted for, and that it was going to cost her considerably more than the scheme had been designed to spend. The morning of the Drummond wedding, Edinburgh put on the thin, precise light of its best behaviour. The ceremony was at St. Giles's. The bride looked terrified and happy in equal measure. The groom looked only happy, which Philippa thought was probably the right distribution. Mrs. Drummond wept with the proficiency of a woman who had been preparing for this moment for 20 years. Philippa stood with her father's party and thought for the first time in years about what it would mean to promise something to someone and mean it. She had thought about marriage as structure, social position, leverage. She had not thought about it as a promise made to a specific person on a specific morning with everyone watching. Across the cathedral, the Duke was with the groom's party. He caught her eye, not deliberately, the way eyes catch across crowded spaces, and looked away. At the reception, she found herself beside him almost immediately. The ceremony was beautiful, she said. They appeared genuinely pleased with each other. He looked at the room. I have watched them at 4 events this fortnight. They look at each other the same way in public as when they think no one is watching. You are thinking that is rare, she said. I am thinking it is rare, he said carefully, and valuable, and you had decided it wasn't possible, she said. He looked at her. She had said it too directly. She watched him reassemble. You promised me a dance, he said. The musicians were setting up. They moved toward it. He gave her his hand and they moved through the first figure, and she was thinking about wrong moments and right ones when he said, quietly, into the turn, My mother and father married for love. It was very visible, very entire. The figure separated them. When it brought them back, he died when I was 19. She was not the same person afterward. She had built everything on one foundation, and when the foundation went, Another figure, another separation back. She died 2 years later. The physicians said her heart, which was true in every sense. Philippa said nothing. She let the dance hold it. I decided, he said, that the entire thing, the visibility of it, was a form of danger. And Isabel Ray confirmed that. She was the proof I had been looking for. A pause. Which is perhaps not entirely fair to her. What happened to the thing you gave her? He looked at her. The dance parted them. When they came back, his expression had changed, not the careful attention, not the private smile. Something she hadn't seen before. It came back, he said, in a box, 6 weeks after she married my cousin. No note? No note. The figure changed. I kept it, he said. I don't know why. She thought, I know why. She did not say it. The dance ended. He did not release her hand immediately, one beat past the music stopping. Then he released her and they separated, and she stood at the edge of the room, with her heart performing a function she had not assigned to it. She had come to Edinburgh for a solution. She had found a complication, and the complication was looking at her from across the room with an expression she had no efficient category for. She had not budgeted for wanting him to say yes, not wanting his name or his title or the solution he represented, wanting, specifically, him to look at her the way the groom was looking at the bride. She pressed the bruise firmly to establish the full extent of it. Then she went to find her father, and her face gave nothing away, and she was excellent company for the rest of the afternoon. She did not sleep well on the night of the Drummond wedding. Philippa Crane had slept well through her father's investigation, through 2 London seasons, through the carriage ride to Edinburgh, knowing she was going to propose marriage to a stranger. At 2:30, she got up, lit the candle, and wrote a letter to Olivia Gibson about the infirmary board. It was a very good letter. Then she sat at the window and watched Edinburgh come back to light, and thought about a pearl brooch returned in a box with no note, and about a man who kept it because he could not decide that nothing real had happened. She thought, I am in considerable difficulty. Then morning arrived and she dressed and went down to breakfast and was useful. The Duke called on Tuesday. Calling required intention. It was not the accidental proximity of a shared event. A card sent ahead. A time agreed. A man arriving at a house for a specific purpose. Philippa received him in the front sitting room, her father conspicuously elsewhere. She had been writing letters at the small desk and did not move from it when he came in. "So, Your Grace," she said, "sit down." He sat. He had the look of a man who had rehearsed something and was revising in real time. "I want to return to a conversation," he said. "The library at Drummond Park. You said you had since learned why I laughed." "Yes." "I owe you an account," he said, "of the real reason, not the version in circulation." "You don't owe me anything." "I think I do." He was looking at her directly. "Isabel Ray. What you heard was that she spread a story when I ended the attachment. That is true. What you didn't hear was what I ended it over." Philippa waited. "I found letters," he said, "written to a friend of hers in which she described our attachment in terms of what it was worth, socially. She had calculated what a connection to a man of good family, but no title was worth, against what a connection to my cousin, who was then heir to the dukedom, would be worth if pursued simultaneously." He said it without particular emphasis. She had done the arithmetic. Philippa was very still. "I ended it," he said. She had not expected me to have seen the letters. When I did, she produced a story that prevented people asking why she had been ended, because the alternative was the truth, that she had been managing 2 investments at once, and I had found the ledger. Within the month she married my cousin, which was what the arithmetic had required of her all along. The room was quiet. "And then I inherited the dukedom," he said, 8 weeks later, which meant the arithmetic she had done was wrong. She had cut the better prospect to secure the lesser one, and she knew it, and I knew it, and there was nothing either of us could do. The brooch came back 6 weeks after the wedding, no note. I have stopped attempting to reconstruct her reasoning. She looked at him. She understood now, completely, the full shape of it, why a woman arriving with a frank proposal and a list of terms had produced that laugh. She had been, to every external appearance, Isabel Ray made legible, the calculation stated clearly rather than hidden in letters. "Julian," she said. It was the first time she had used his name. It arrived because it was the right word for what she needed to say. He looked at her with the full force of his attention, I have done arithmetic, she said. I have calculated what your name is worth and how it serves my family's position. All of that is true. She held his gaze. It is also true that I have spent 3 weeks revising everything I thought about you, and that when you held my hand 1 beat too long at the end of the wedding dance, I spent half the night not sleeping, which I do not do. She paused. My proposal was honest. And I'm telling you now, also honestly, that the arithmetic is no longer the only thing in the room. He was very still. I am not asking you to decide anything, she said. I am correcting my earlier statement. I told you what I wanted, and it was the truth, but it was not the complete truth, and I do not like carrying incomplete accounts. He stood. She thought for one sharp moment that he was going to leave. He crossed the room instead. He stopped in front of her, the desk between them. I do not know what to do with you, he said. And I mean that as the most genuine thing I have said to anyone in a very long time. That seems like a reasonable starting place, she said. She stood. The desk was still between them, but they were both standing now, which was different. I laughed because I thought I knew the shape of what you were doing, he said. I was wrong. And I have been wrong about you in ways that... The thing is, I don't mind. His voice quieter now. I told you I wanted to be wrong about people more often. I did not expect to be corrected this thoroughly, this quickly. I find efficiency important, she said. He almost laughed. The real one, not the social performance. Something that happened to his face without permission. Philippa, he said. She noted what her name did when he said it, and told herself to be quiet about it. I have spent 7 years being very careful, he said. I'm not certain I know how to stop. Yeah, I'm not asking you to stop, she said. I'm asking you to be careful with me instead of from me. He looked at her for a long time. Then he reached across the desk, not for her hand. His fingers landed on the edge of the writing desk, an inch from hers. Not a touch, a proximity. I need to think, he said. Yes, she said, that seems right. He withdrew his hand. He picked up his hat. He stopped at the door and turned back. The brooch, he said. I know why I kept it, because throwing it away would have meant deciding that nothing real had happened, and I have not been able to decide that. He left. She stood at the desk with her hand still resting where his fingers had not quite touched. He had kept it because it was real. Isabel Ray had the real thing, weighed it against the ledger, and chose the ledger. I will not do that, she thought, and sat back down and could not remember what she had been writing. He did not call again that week. She was told through Mrs. Farquhar's morning call network that he had gone to Fife for several days to visit a friend. She wrote to Olivia Gibson. She found an error in the third quarter accounts that saved her father £400. She walked on Princes Street in the cold and looked at the castle and thought about nothing in particular with great concentration. On Friday, a note arrived. Miss Crane, I return to Edinburgh tomorrow. There is something I should like to show you if you are willing. Carlo. She wrote back, Your Grace, I am willing, P. Crane. He came the next morning, and they walked north through the new town down the slope toward the water of Leith, where the path ran along the river through pale winter trees. He walked beside her at a pace that suited them both, and said very little for the first quarter hour. I went to Fife, he said eventually, to speak to my cousin. Marcus. He and Isabel have been married 7 years. He is not unhappy, I think. He is a different kind of man, and she suited him, ultimately, better than she suited me. He paused. I went because I had been carrying something that was partly mine, and partly not, and I needed to see him to separate them. And? It was not as difficult as I had feared. He glanced at her. We spoke about his estate, his children, a property dispute that has somehow lasted 4 years. I slept in the same room I had as a child. In the morning I felt lighter. They came to where the path widened near the river, brown and quick with the season's rain. He stopped. He reached into his coat pocket and held out his hand. In his palm a small brooch, pearl set in gold, modest and carefully made. She looked at it. I brought it because I wanted you to see it, he said. I'm not giving it to you, that would be the wrong gesture. I wanted you to see it because I told you about it, and it seemed wrong to keep it abstract. He looked at his palm. It is smaller than I remembered. It's lovely, she said, simply because it was. He closed his hand and returned it to his pocket. I'm going to stop carrying it, not throw it away, but stop carrying it. He looked at the river. I thought it was evidence that something had been real. I have decided the evidence is not in the object. Where is it? He looked at her. I'm not certain yet, but not there. They stood by the river. The water ran past. A pair of ducks moved through the current with the calm practicality of creatures who had no interest in the conversation happening above them. Philippa, he said. Yes. I am going to ask you something that is not a business arrangement. All right. He turned to face her. He had the look of a man who had rehearsed this considerably more than the last visit and had abandoned the rehearsal. I would like to court you, he said, formally, with your father's knowledge, not because it is useful or because I have calculated that you are the correct solution to anything, because you are the most interesting person I have encountered in 7 years, and I would like the right to be in the same room as you without requiring an assembly to accomplish it. He looked at her steadily. And because I think I am being wrong about you in ways I have not finished being wrong about, and I would like time to complete the process. Yes, she said. That's all. You asked a clear question. It deserved a clear answer. He exhaled, not quite a laugh but related to one. He offered her his arm for the walk back. She took it. They walked back up through the pale winter trees, with the river behind them and the city above them. The formal courtship of Miss Philippa Crane by the Duke of Carlo became known to Edinburgh on a Tuesday, which was unfortunate timing, as Tuesdays were the primary day for morning calls. By noon, it had completed 3 full circuits of the new town. The reactions divided along lines Philippa had anticipated. People who liked her were pleased. People who liked her father's money were cautiously optimistic. People who liked neither were watchful. They found their opportunity on Thursday at Mrs. Haldane's. Philippa was there with Mrs. Lyle discussing the November program at the Philosophical Society, when she heard her name from across the room in a tone that required attention. Crane girl has done very well for herself, if it holds, said Mrs. Pemberton, though I confess I wonder what the Duke is thinking. Very pretty, very efficient, people say, but the family, never proven. The tone that made those 2 words do more work than they required. Those who feel that a title like Carlo deserves what exactly? Philippa had not decided to speak. She had simply spoken. The room recalibrated. Mrs. Lyle made a small involuntary movement. Mrs. Pemberton turned. I beg your pardon? You said the title deserved something, Philippa said pleasantly. I was curious what you felt it might not be receiving. I was making a general observation, Mrs. Pemberton said, regrouping. Of course, I wondered if you could be more specific, because general observations about never proven can lead to imprecision. She set down her teacup. My father was investigated. The investigation found no evidence of wrongdoing. Those are the facts. Everything else is an interpretation, and interpretations vary depending on who is doing the interpreting and what purpose they want it to serve. Silence. Miss Crane, said Mrs. Haldane, with the authority of a woman on whose sofa this was occurring, we were not— I know, Philippa said. I'm sorry for the interruption. It was not polite of me. She was perfectly composed. But I find the polite response to a particular kind of remark is generally indistinguishable from agreement with it, and I am not able to agree with imprecision about my father. Mrs. Haldane turned to the woman on her left and made a remark about the concert program. The room exhaled and resumed. Mrs. Pemberton left somewhat earlier than she had arrived. In the carriage afterward, Mrs. Lyle said, that was either very brave or very inadvisable. Possibly both. Mrs. Pemberton has influence. Mrs. Pemberton has a mouth, Philippa said. They are not the same thing. She arrived home to find the Duke in the hall. He had called and been invited to wait by Sir Alister. Philippa came through the door and found him with his hat in his hand, and the look of a man who had also heard about Mrs. Pemberton and had made a decision. You should have sent a note, she said. I would have been here. I didn't want to give either of us time to prepare remarks, he said. She led him to the sitting room. Neither of them sat. I wasn't going to ask you to apologize, he said. I was there. She looked at him. I arrived at Mrs. Haldane's after you. I was in the hallway. The door was ajar when you spoke. He held her gaze. I had every intention of coming in and saying something on your behalf, which I now realize would have been precisely the wrong thing. You were managing very well. I stayed in the hallway. I stayed in the hallway, and then I left because I needed to think about what I had just heard. He paused. I thought about what it costs you, every time, to walk into a room knowing your father's name will be used in that tone, and to decide whether to answer it or let it pass, knowing either choice has consequences. He paused. I have had my own version. The story about me. I let it pass. I told myself it was beneath the dignity of the position. Another pause. It was cowardice dressed as dignity. She said nothing. What you did today was not cowardice, he said. Mrs. Lyle thinks it was inadvisable. Mrs. Lyle is not wrong. It may cost you with Mrs. Pemberton's circle. He looked at her steadily. It was also right, and I cannot be near someone who consistently does what is right and call the cost inadvisable. She felt something release, a tension she had carried since the carriage ride home. Philippa, he said, and her name still did what it did. I came here because I needed you to know that I am not going to be the kind of man who wishes his future wife were quieter about her father. The room went completely still. Future wife. He heard himself, she saw him hear himself. Don't, she said. He stopped. Don't qualify it, she said, if you meant it. A long pause. I meant it, he said. She crossed the room. There was no version of this in her list of terms. No calculation that had produced this particular movement. 3 steps across a sitting room on a Thursday afternoon in Edinburgh, with the winter light coming in at its thin, precise angle. She stopped in front of him. He looked at her face and then, quite deliberately, he bent his head and kissed her. It was brief. It was not tentative. It was the kiss of a man who had made a decision and was carrying it out without apology. He pulled back, close enough that she could see him. Not the charm, not the careful attention, just him, the actual person underneath. I am still not certain, he said quietly, that I know how to be the kind of man who deserves... Stop, she said. He stopped. You are deciding in advance what you deserve, she said. The evidence is not yet complete. He looked at her for a moment. You are going to apply your accounting principles to my emotional life. I was not going to call it that, she said. But yes, that laugh, the real one, without permission. She felt it arrive as though it were partly hers. He kissed her again, longer this time. The winter light held them, and she thought, with the small, still part of her that observed everything, that she had been solving for her father's name in a room, and had solved for something else entirely. She found she did not mind. Sir Alistair Crane appeared in the doorway at a time that suggested he had heard something, and decided his presence was now appropriate. He looked at his daughter and at the Duke and said, I see. Father, Philippa said. Oh, Your Grace, said Sir Alistair. Sir Alistair, I should like to speak with you. Yes, I imagine you should. He looked at his daughter. Philippa. She went to the morning room and wrote the letter to Olivia Gibson she had been meaning to write about the hospital board, because it needed writing, and she had been remiss. She was halfway through it when both men came in together. Sir Alistair wore the expression of a man whose negotiation had gone better than expected. I believe I am to acquire a son-in-law. She looked at Julian. You asked him formally? You had already answered me, he said. You crossed the room. She put down her pen and stood. I have a condition. He raised an eyebrow. The brooch. Don't throw it away, don't give it away. Keep it as evidence that something real happened because it did, and the evidence matters. Just stop carrying it. He looked at her for a long moment. Why does it matter to you? Because I intend for you to believe that real things happen, she said. I have a vested interest in you retaining that belief. He raised her hand and pressed his mouth to her knuckles, old-fashioned, deliberate. Where should I put it? I'll think of somewhere, she said. The engagement was announced on a Monday. By Thursday, a letter had arrived from a connection of Julian's mother, who had not heard from him in 3 years, which told Philippa something about how thoroughly it had spread. Julian's cousin Marcus Forth wrote, brief, without irony, wishing them well. A postscript, glad you went to Fife. Nothing more. She read it twice and handed it to Julian, who read it once and folded it with care. Her father came into the morning room on Thursday evening and sat with the expression she had only seen twice before, both times involving her mother. You are happy, he said. Not quite a question. Yes, I did not plan to be. I planned to be satisfied. I planned to be well situated. She paused. I did not plan for this particular variety. No, he said. You cannot plan for it. Your mother did not plan for it either. She came to Edinburgh with an entirely different purpose, and married me in 3 months, and called it the best miscalculation of her life. He stood. She would have liked him. He answers back. She appreciated that. He does, she said, when it's true. Good, said her father. "That's the important part." They were married in February. Edinburgh in February was not, as Julian said while reviewing the proposed date, the city's most hospitable month. Philippa said she had no interest in waiting for June, and that cold air and good decisions were not mutually exclusive, and that the church at the end of Charlotte Street had a very fine interior that would benefit from the contrast with whatever February chose to do outside. Julian said he deferred to her judgment, and then added that he would like to be married before March, on the grounds that he had no intention of spending additional weeks in the state of being engaged to her without being actually married to her. She looked at him. "You are constantly composing lists," he said, "and revising them and crossing things off and adding things. I would like to be in a different column." "What column?" "The one that begins husband," he said. "February," she confirmed. The church at the end of Charlotte Street was cold and very fine. Sir Alistair looked at his daughter in the vestibule and said, "Well," which contained everything, and she squeezed his hand and he walked her in. At the altar, Julian turned when he heard her come in, and she saw his face do the thing she had been watching for since the Drummond wedding, the same expression in front of everyone as when he thought no one was watching. She crossed the church toward him. The vows were said, the register signed, and they came out into the February cold to a small crowd. Julian put her hand on his arm and held it there with the pressure of a man who had made a decision and was not planning to revise it. The first thing she learned about living with Julian Forth was that he read in the morning. Not after breakfast. Before it, in the library of Carlow House with a cup of coffee, he made himself because he did not want to ring before the household was organized. She discovered this on the third day of their marriage, following her lifelong habit of being awake before she was needed. He looked up from his book, shirt sleeves, the expression of a man found in a private habit. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." He closed the book on his finger. "What are you reading?" He showed her the spine, Hume. "I have opinions about Hume," she said. "I know, you mentioned it in October, twice. You remember what I said in October?" He looked at her with the expression that was only hers. "I remember most things you've said, starting from the assembly rooms." She sat down in the chair across from him. He did not look surprised. He offered her a cup, she said yes, he rang for another, and they sat in the library in the early morning while Edinburgh made its first noises outside, and she told him what was wrong with Hume. He disagreed on 2 specific points, and was right about one of them. "I'm right sometimes," she said. "I find it important to acknowledge it." "Noted," he said. She looked around the library, the kind of room she had spent her adult life cataloguing the distance from. "This is mine now," she said, not meaning the library specifically. "Yes," he said. "I find I'm going to need some time to manage that information." "Take whatever time you need," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." The brooch lived now on a small shelf in their bedroom, beside a miniature of Julian's mother and a volume of Burns that had been Philippa's since she was 14. She had placed it there on the second day of their marriage without explanation. When Julian came in and saw it, he was quiet for a moment and then said nothing, which was the right response. "Your mother," she said one evening a few weeks after the wedding. He was reading by the fire. "Tell me about her before." He looked up. She laughed very suddenly. It surprised people. She was very composed, and then something would catch her. He looked at the fire. She could see what people needed and gave it without making them feel they'd been seen doing it. She sounds like you," he said. In the precision of it, she was less direct, but the seeing. He paused. "Yes? Was it terrible after he died?" "Yes," he said simply. "It was the proof I needed that the entire thing was a danger. I was 19 and very certain." He looked at her. "I am no longer 19. But the certainty has become a different certainty," he said. "Specific rather than general." He looked at her with the expression that was only hers. "Whatever we build will not be built on one foundation, because you don't work that way, and neither, I think, do I. Now." She looked at him. "You have applied accounting principles to your emotional life." "You did that," he said. "I merely adopted the method." She crossed the room and sat in the arm of his chair, which was slightly improper and entirely comfortable, and he arranged the book out of the way and put his arm around her, as though he had been doing it for years. "I did not plan for this," she said. "I know," he said. "That was clear from the original proposal." "The original proposal was very well constructed." "It was." He was quiet a moment. "What would you have done differently?" I would not have been so efficient about it, she said. I would have allowed for the possibility that what I was doing was not purely strategic before I was confronted with the evidence. The evidence being? Not sleeping, she said, and a hand held one beat too long. He turned his head and pressed his mouth to her hair. I would not have laughed, he said. You were correct to laugh, given what you knew. I was underinformed, he said, and I laughed because it was easier than the alternative. What was the alternative? Hoping, he said, that it might be real. The fire went down. Edinburgh settled into its winter night. She thought about the pearl brooch on the shelf between his mother and her burns, and about the small word, evidence, that had been doing so much work from the very beginning. March arrived and the light changed. Julian's cousin Marcus wrote again, longer, an overture as much as a legal query, the letter of a man who had been cautious for 7 years and was incrementally less so. Julian wrote back at length. Philippa added a postscript, 3 lines, careful, claiming neither too much nor too little. He read it before they sealed the letter and said, "Thank you." It costs nothing to be generous to people who deserve it, she said. And those who don't? Cost more to be generous to, but it's still often worth the investment. Thomas Forbes received an invitation from the hospital board. He came to Carlow House the evening before to rehearse what he intended to say, and Julian was in the library and listened and made 3 suggestions, 2 of which Thomas used. Philippa watched Julian across the table and thought about a man who could see what people needed and gave it without making them feel seen. Thought, I married someone who has his mother in him, and nearly buried that quality in self-preservation and did not quite manage it. She was glad he did not quite manage it. In April, on a Tuesday, 8 weeks into their marriage, he came into the morning room where she was reading and sat down across from her. I want to tell you something, he said. She put down her book. I am happy, he said. I want to say it plainly because I have spent a significant portion of my adult life being precise about difficult things, and I should be equally precise about the good ones. She looked at him. I am aware it is slightly absurd to announce this formally. It is not absurd, she said. It is efficient. That laugh, the real one, the one that happened without permission. She had 38 variations catalogued now. This was 39. You are keeping count, he said. Of your laughs, she said, since October. He was quiet for a moment. Philippa. Julian, she said. He came across the room and sat beside her, and picked up her hand with the ease of a man for whom this had become natural, which it had gradually, then entirely, the way most things become natural in the right company. What is the current count? He said. 39, she said. The record for a single day is 7. The afternoon Forbes sent the letter about the board meeting. He touched the sapphire ring on her finger, chosen with care, different from the brooch, the gesture of a man who knew what gestures meant. I want to tell you one more thing plainly, he said. Tell me. I am grateful that you came to Edinburgh with a scheme, that you sat in a gallery and counted my smiles before coming to be introduced. He looked at her steadily, that you went to the window and made your proposal, and that I laughed, which was the wrong response, but which was also the beginning. You should not be grateful for the scheme, she said. The scheme was a form of cowardice dressed as efficiency. No, he said. It was a form of love that didn't know what it was yet. He held her gaze. You could see what I was underneath the charm, and you came anyway. That is not a scheme. That is considerable bravery in the guise of a list of terms. She had not thought of it that way. She thought about it now and found he was right, which she would tell him, because she had told him he was right about Hume, and found it a habit she was glad to have established. You were right about Drummond Park, she said. The pattern holds. I am sentimental about specific things. She paused. This is one of them. He raised her hand and pressed his mouth to her fingers. 40, she said. I wasn't laughing. Smiling counts, she said. Separately catalogued, current total 112. He looked at her. Since when? Since the assembly rooms, she said. I started before I came downstairs. Outside, Edinburgh went about its business with the brisk indifference of a city that has seen everything. The light came through the morning room windows at the angle of April, still thin, beginning to relent. On the shelf above them, a pearl brooch sat between a miniature and a volume of Burns. Evidence that something real had happened, no longer carried, but not gone. She had come to Edinburgh for a title and a solution. She had solved for the wrong thing entirely. She remained on balance entirely in favor of the error.